There is something about getting older that changes the way you look back at your life. When you're young, you think success is measured by the things you achieve, the awards you win, the movies people remember, the moments when the world knows your name. But after many years have passed, you begin to realize that those things are only part of the story. The things that stay with you are the people, the conversations nobody saw, the friendships that existed away from the cameras, the people who were there before the applause started and remained long after it faded. Gene Hackman spent more than 5 decades in Hollywood. He became one of the most respected actors of his generation. Audiences knew him as the man who could disappear completely into any role: a detective, a villain, a father, a soldier, a complicated character with layers that made people think long after the movie ended. But behind all those unforgettable performances was a much quieter man who valued privacy, loyalty, and the simple moments that fame could never replace. When people talk about Gene Hackman, they often talk about his greatest films. They talk about the characters he created and the performances that made him a legend. But if you asked him what truly mattered after all those years, the answer would not be a movie title or an award sitting on a shelf. It would be the names of the people who walked through his life and left something behind. Because the truth is, Hollywood can introduce you to thousands of people, but only a few become part of your story. Some people share a scene with you. Others share a moment that you remember for the rest of your life. And sometimes, the people who mean the most are not always the ones the world expects. Looking back, these were the people who represented something special to Gene Hackman, not because they were the most famous names he knew, but because they gave him something much more valuable than recognition. They gave him friendship, respect, inspiration, and memories that remained long after the cameras stopped rolling. The first person who comes to mind is Christopher Reeve. Many people remember Christopher Reeve as Superman, the actor who brought one of the most iconic heroes in cinema history to life. But Gene Hackman remembered something different. He remembered the young actor behind the costume, the person who arrived on set with determination, kindness, and a willingness to learn. When they worked together on Superman, Hackman was already an established actor. He had earned respect through years of difficult roles and powerful performances. Reeve, on the other hand, was stepping into a role that would change his entire life. The pressure was enormous. Millions of people were waiting to judge him. But Gene noticed something about him immediately. He noticed that Christopher wasn't trying to become famous. He was trying to do the work properly. He cared about the details. He listened. He respected everyone around him, from the biggest names on set to the people working behind the scenes. That was something Gene always admired. In an industry where people could easily become focused on attention and reputation, Christopher carried himself differently. He treated people like people. And for someone like Gene Hackman, who had spent decades watching how fame changed those around him, that kind of character mattered. Years later, when Christopher Reeve's life changed after his accident, Gene saw something even more powerful. He saw courage. He saw a man who had lost a career that defined him, but refused to lose his purpose. He watched Christopher become an advocate, a father, and a symbol of strength for millions. And that stayed with him. Because sometimes the people we admire most are not the ones who achieve everything easily. They are the ones who face impossible challenges and still find a reason to keep going. Christopher Reeve reminded Gene that strength was not only about the characters people played on screen. Real strength was shown in the quiet moments when nobody was watching. The second person who would always hold a special place in Gene Hackman's memories was Clint Eastwood. Their careers followed different paths, but they shared something important. They understood what it meant to build a life in Hollywood without losing yourself. Clint Eastwood was known around the world as a tough, legendary figure. The Westerns, the unforgettable characters, the calm confidence that made audiences believe every word he said. But those who knew him personally often saw a much simpler person beneath that image. Gene respected that. He admired people who did not need to constantly prove who they were. And Clint Eastwood had that rare quality. He was comfortable with silence. He didn't need attention in every room. He didn't need to remind people of his accomplishments because everyone already knew. That was something Gene understood deeply. Their conversations were not always about movies. In fact, after spending so many years in the business, actors often preferred talking about ordinary things: family, life, the changing world, the experiences that had nothing to do with cameras or scripts. Those were the moments that mattered. Gene knew that fame could create distance between people. The more successful someone became, the harder it sometimes was to find genuine conversations. But with someone like Clint, there was a feeling of simplicity, a feeling that you were speaking to the person, not the public image. And that was rare. As the years passed, Gene began to appreciate those friendships even more. When you're younger, you think there will always be more time, more meetings, more conversations, more opportunities to tell someone you appreciate them. But life has a way of moving faster than we expect. Eventually, the movies become memories. The interviews become old recordings. The awards become objects sitting quietly in a room. But the people remain. The people who made you laugh. The people who challenged you. The people who reminded you why the journey was worth taking. For Gene Hackman, those were the relationships that defined his life. Not the fame, not the headlines, not the attention, the people. And there were still 3 more names that carried stories, memories, and moments that shaped one of Hollywood's most remarkable careers. The third person who would always remain an important part of Gene Hackman's journey was Dustin Hoffman. When 2 great actors share the screen, audiences often focus on the performances. They notice the dialogue, the emotions, the intensity between the characters. But what they rarely see is what happens between those moments. The conversations before filming begins, the respect that develops over years, the quiet understanding between 2 people who both know how demanding this craft can be. Gene Hackman and Dustin Hoffman came from different backgrounds, but they shared a similar passion. They both understood that acting was not about becoming famous. It was about discovering something honest inside a character and bringing that truth to the audience. Gene respected that about Dustin. Dustin was never someone who simply walked onto a set and delivered lines. He questioned everything. He searched for meaning in every scene. He wanted to understand why a character behaved the way they did, what pain they carried, and what emotions existed beneath the surface. For an actor like Gene, that dedication was something special, because true artists recognize each other. They understand the hours nobody sees, the preparation nobody notices, the doubts that exist even after years of success. Hollywood often makes acting look effortless, but people like Gene and Dustin knew the reality. Great performances were built through patience, discipline, and a willingness to keep learning. What Gene admired most was not Dustin's fame or his awards. It was his honesty toward the work. There was a humility behind the talent, and that was something Gene valued throughout his own career. He never wanted to be remembered only as a famous actor. He wanted to be remembered as someone who respected the craft and respected the people who shared that journey with him. Over the years, their conversations went beyond movies. They talked about changing times in Hollywood. They talked about family. They talked about the strange experience of becoming famous and try to maintain a normal life when the entire world knows your name. Those conversations are the ones people remember, because friendship is rarely created during the biggest moments. It is created in the small moments between them. A conversation after a long day of filming. A quiet dinner away from the cameras. A simple phone call just to check how someone is doing. Those are the things that remain. And for Gene Hackman, Dustin Hoffman represented one of those rare friendships built on mutual respect. The fourth person who held a special place in Gene's heart was Gene Wilder. For many people, Gene Wilder was remembered as one of the most unique and unforgettable performers in cinema history. His imagination, his humor, and his ability to bring warmth to even the strangest characters made him beloved by generations. But Gene Hackman saw more than the performer. He saw the person. He saw someone with a gentle spirit behind the wild energy audiences loved. The world knew Gene Wilder for his incredible comedy. They remembered the laughter, the unforgettable expressions, the unusual characters that only he could create. But people who knew him understood there was much more beneath the surface. There was kindness. There was sensitivity. There was a deep understanding of human emotion. And that was something Gene Hackman connected with, because although Hackman was often associated with intense dramatic roles, he understood that great storytelling came from emotion. Whether a person made audiences laugh or cry, the goal was the same: to make people feel something. Gene Wilder had that ability. He could make millions of people smile, but he also understood sadness, loneliness, and the complicated emotions that exist behind every person. That balance fascinated Gene. He respected people who could show vulnerability, people who could admit that life was not always perfect, people who could find humor even during difficult moments. And Gene Wilder had that rare gift. When Gene Hackman looked back at his career, he didn't only remember the successful films or the moments on stage. He remembered the people who made the journey meaningful. People like Gene Wilder reminded him that Hollywood was not just about competition. It was also about connection. The final person who would always represent something meaningful in Gene Hackman's life was his family. Because after all the movies, all the characters, and all the years spent in front of cameras, family was the one thing that remained separate from Hollywood. Fame can be temporary. Careers change. Public attention moves quickly from one person to another. But family is where a person returns when everything else becomes quiet. Gene Hackman was known for protecting his private life. He never seemed interested in constantly being in the spotlight. Unlike many celebrities who built their lives around public attention, he preferred a simpler existence away from Hollywood's constant noise. That choice revealed something important about him. He understood what mattered. He understood that a person's worth is not measured by how many people recognize them. It is measured by the people who truly know them, the people who have seen them at their best and their worst, the people who stayed when there was nothing to gain. Those are the relationships that define a lifetime. And when someone reaches the later chapters of their life, those are the memories they return to, not the premieres, not the applause, not the headlines, the people, the conversations, the moments that felt real. Gene Hackman's career gave the world unforgettable characters, but the people closest to him gave him something even greater. They gave him memories. They gave him stories. They gave him a reason to look back with gratitude. Because at the end of a long journey, everyone eventually discovers the same truth. The greatest achievement is not the work you leave behind. It is the love and respect you leave in the hearts of others. Gene Hackman may always be remembered as one of Hollywood's greatest actors, but behind the legendary performances was a man who understood something much deeper. Life was never about being remembered by everyone. It was about being remembered by the people who mattered, and those are the memories that truly last forever.